Welcome to the RP Show.
With me, Steve Johnson.
And me, the Tubiac Maniac.
This show is all about retinitis pigmentosa. So if you have RP or you know somebody with RP, please consider subscribing. In this week's episode, Mike and I discuss how it really feels to use a cane for the very first time. We also have an interview with Mr. Anthony Beale, the head of strategic operations, who was my employer at the time when I had to broach the subject of using a cane in work for the very first time. Do you remember the very, very first time you used your cane and how you felt?
I recall I started wanting to practice with it, I'd go to work out at the YMCA, the local YMCA in my area, and I thought the route was pretty perfect as a trial run to see how it would go. And I remember just feeling like every car that passed me was looking at me. I mean, all the lights were on me. Look at the blind guys here, the blind guys.
Spotlight on you and sirens and people staring at you. Did you feel?
Yeah.
Okay.
And it probably it's probably on my head, but that's literally how I felt. Spotlights were on. Here's the blind guy. He's walking with his cane. Look at him, And it took a while before I got to that, I think, other side of things. And what about you?
Yeah, same. Really felt like awkward and really unwanted attention on me. But interestingly, Mike, I've got a bit of surprise for you here. So when I had to start using my cane, one of the things that I was worried about was using it in work, in the workplace, colleagues and people. So I've actually gone back in time, got in touch with the manager that I had at the time when I very, very first decided to come out and start using my cane. Anyway, I've gone and interviewed him and asked him from his perspective as an employer, what it was like to have an employee approach and say, by the way, I'm going blind, and from tomorrow I'll be using a white cane. So if you want to see it, Mike, I'll play you that interview right now.
Let's do it. Let's see this.
Good evening, Mr. Veal. Thanks for agreeing to this interview.
No problem, Steve. Hope you're well.
Yeah, very well. Hope you're doing well in your new role at your new firm, and you're bearing up under the lockdown strain.
Yeah, no, it's all good. All good so far.
Excellent. Right. Well, as I explained on the phone, I just wanted to interview you specifically around a really key moment in my life, which was when I decided to start using a white cane for the very first time. You were my boss at the time. I was working for you. So I'm just going to kick off with a couple of quick questions. So first one, how many visually impaired or blind people have you managed or employed?
As far as I know, you're the only one. The only one that I know about, but I guess there could be people that had, visual impairments that I didn't know about. But no, I think you're the only one that I've really sort of had a sort of conscious awareness of. So yeah. Okay.
So I just wanted to ask you then, first of all, can you recall, I don't even know how long ago it was. It must have been, how long do you think it was? Was it about 10 years ago when I first came to you about my eyesight problem? Maybe more?
Yeah, a little bit more, I think. It was definitely late 2000s.
Okay. And do you recall the day I actually decided to come and approach you and tell you about my situation?
Yeah, I do, because I remember thinking about the conversation afterwards and almost having to really reflect and think about it, not just from my point of view, but from yours. As in, I realise from that conversation what your thought process was and what your apprehensions, if you like, about facing into this challenge that you were, because it never occurred to me beforehand. I was very aware of your condition and all that, because we had good conversations about it, but I'd never really thought about this particular juncture in your life, if you like.
As in coming out as a cane user and broaching that subject in a busy workplace, because we had, how many staff did we have in that office, do you reckon?
600 plus, I would say, at peak.
Okay. And at the time,
in our wing, we had about, 100 120, 140 people in the actual wing where we worked.
Okay. And do you actually recall our conversation? Do you remember me coming in? Do you remember where we were? What room we were in? Do you remember
Yeah.
how I can't remember how I started the conversation. Did it come as a total shock?
No, it didn't come as a shock for the simple reason that, you know, I'd noticed that you'd been kind of bumping into things, and I think you just kind of passed it off, and you know, you just oh, sorry, and you're kind of apologetic about it. So I had noticed it. However, you know, I was being respectful around, you know, you know your own limitations, you know the challenge that you face every day, and I didn't really want to kind of broach it, you know, with you. But I was kind of glad that you spoke to me, because I thought, yeah, I had noticed you bumped into things more often than usual. So I do remember the conversation. I remember exactly where we were, because we were on a wing in the old Vodafone building where we worked. It was the old wing where Les Black used to sit as well at some point on the left, because we moved later to another wing, but I remember we were in there. And at first, I think when you spoke to me about it, I wasn't surprised, but my initial response was, well, yeah, you'll be fine. You know, everyone's be really understanding about it. You know, people will, you know, be, if anything, be supportive, and you know, we'll get the idea that you needed to use a cane all of a sudden. But what I hadn't thought about was what you'd been thinking about, which was how are people going to view you, people that you don't get chances to maybe speak to. So one day, you know, I remember exactly what you said to me. You know, one day this guy who we see in the office every day, that a lot of people didn't know you had a condition with your sight or anything. They just knew you were Steve and talked away, and you passed it off. You hit it quite well, which is, you know, is not, I think it's probably normal behaviour, because you don't want to draw attention to it, because for you it's just normal life. It's not something you want to make a big deal of. And so a lot of people didn't know you had the condition, and therefore for you come in the next day with a white stick, you know, don't want to make light of it, but you know, it's almost like, and I think you said, you know, has this guy gone blind overnight, sort of thing, which how it might appear to some people. But and I thought, well, no, even so, people will understand once explained. But that's the challenge, isn't it? You can't go around and have conversations with everybody. So that's what we talked about. We said that, you know, suggested that we take an approach whereby we speak to all the managers and just let them know what's happening out of courtesy, and get them to have, you know, not any formal conversations, but just conversations with their team, just to let them know the situation. And I think that was twofold, really, so that they didn't feel difficult and awkward about it, and they understood the situation, but also to sort of save you having to have that conversation to lots of people. And the other thing that you said, and I remember this really well, was that, you know, you were kind of conscious that you'd be walking across the call centre floor using your white stick, and you'd go out into the break area and use the coffee machine. So actually, you'd be pressing the digits in the coffee machine, and they were almost, you know, they would almost be thinking, hang on a minute, this guy's walking across to the white stick, and then he's putting his numbers in the coffee machine. Can he? What kind of? And it is difficult if people don't understand the limitations of your condition. They would be quite confused by that, and that's the stuff that we talked about. So yeah, I do remember it. I don't fully remember the follow up around how, you know, how those conversations with the team leaders and their teams went. I do remember the team leaders, because they all knew you pretty well, and you were quite open about stuff with them around your condition and stuff. And so they were all dead supportive. They were all, yeah, it's not, you know, it won't be a problem. Everyone will understand. And they were quite reassuring, if I remember. But I didn't remember that. It is over 10 years ago, though, mate. So I don't remember all the follow up.
Okay, cool. Okay, so the next thing I wanted to ask you then. So this show that I'm doing, hence why I wanted to interview you specifically, we're trying to help people, especially like within the RP community. There will be a lot of people out there that are apprehensive about using a cane, and this whole episode that you're now going to be a part of is literally just about when should I start using a cane and how should I approach it and things to worry about. So what advice would you have, first of all, for any, you know, if you think back to like a young Steve Johnson 10, 15, 20 years ago, you know, if you come across this sort of situation again, what sort of advice would you have for somebody that's putting off and struggling and avoiding using a cane because of the social pressures?
Well, first of all, I get it. I understand the social pressures, and I think that whole episode enabled me to think about it, whereas I hadn't. I just thought, no, everyone will be fine. You know, quite blasé about it, if I'm honest. But with hindsight, I think, yeah, it's probably a good thing to approach it sensibly. I would probably say try find a trusted source that you can confide in and speak to. In this instance, that was probably you speaking to me. I think there was probably other people you could have spoken to that would have equally have helped and been equally understanding and supportive. And yeah, just lay the foundations. I don't think social pressure to stop you doing what is clearly needed. You know, you're making a sacrifice for what? You know, it's kind of like I think you need to face into it, but be mindful of people's reactions. People only know what they know, so I think it's important to communicate in the right way so that people actually understand it. And actually, Steve, you'll know this because it's happened a few times. You've joined different groups of people that you've worked with. You know, I think it's always good to face into it. And I think I teed you up a few times where I've just said to you, you know, just explain to the guys what it is that your condition and how it works, what you can see, what you can't see, and what the limitations are, and what type of support that you need. And I think that became, I don't know how easy it was for you at the start, but over time it felt like it was something quite normal and natural for you to kind of people. And
I
say,
can remember a few times where we would get into like a business meeting scenario, and I would completely forget to mention the whole eyesight thing, and you'd be like, "Steve, are you going to mention that you're blind or visually impaired?" And we would, you know, I did get quite used to it, and almost sometimes you'd have to pull me up on it and say, you know, you better add some context here. So yeah, I guess it did get easier over time.
I suppose with hindsight, thinking about your situation, probably what made it more difficult in a way was that you hid it really well. You know, people would speak to you, and you would think, I have no idea who this person is. On occasion, you'd recognise their voice, and you'd work it from there. But on other occasions, you didn't recognise the voice, so you would just played along, and you'd call them mates, or you'd just use a general term. And I think, you know, that's admirable that you kind of worked around that. You didn't bring attention to your condition or talk about it too much, but it probably made that whole experience of you trying to sort of come out, if you like, to use your expression, more difficult because a lot of people didn't know. Whereas, you know, it's not something you need to be afraid of. It's not something you should shy away from. You know, your condition is something that is part of you. It makes you. You know, you are the person you are because of that in part. And so I would probably say if you had your time again, you might have been more open about it. Just to signpost people, you know, ever before you maybe using the white stick, just so that people understand that you're not being ignorant, you're not addressing them by name, because actually, I don't know who it is unless, you know, you address yourself when you come and speak to me or stuff like that, if that makes sense.
Yeah, okay. And my last question is, what advice would you give to any like employers that are faced with a similar situation?
I can only really sort of say how I would work, and that was that, you know, be understanding, be sensitive to the situation. I think communication is massively key in dealing with these things. I think it's important to put yourself in that person's shoes, and also the audience, whoever they're addressing, their shoes as well, because unless you tell them, they don't know. And I'm kind of one of these people that I always think there's good in people, and you know, if you speak to them and talk to them about the situation, people will be understanding and supportive. And you know, if anyone isn't, then you know that's their problem, and you can't fix that. I think you just need to sort of work on the basis that most people are good and supportive. And yeah, I think communication is probably key. Some employers probably don't know how to handle it. You know, it's a new thing. It's difficult. It's whether you can say the right thing. I think you helped, Steve, because you were always quite light-hearted and quite open about it. But not everyone is. You know, you can't expect everyone to be like that. It's levels of comfort, and it's, you know, sometimes it's the people that you work with. If there's a level of trust there, you can relax and you can be quite open and stuff. So creating that environment, hopefully where we worked, we have that environment where, you know, sometimes you can talk about things that are light-hearted. You probably joked about your condition more than anyone else, and that sort of lightened the mood, and people could relax then, and I think that helps. But does that answer your question though?
Yeah, really good. And just one tiny little follow-up question. Now you've had that experience of managing and employing a visually impaired person. If a CV came across your desk, and it, you know, there was an indication that this person was visually impaired, or someone turned up to an interview, you know, just for my viewers out there, you know, how what's your perception of employing like a visually impaired person?
I think it's only matters what you're employing that person to do, and if they've got the capability to do that role, they're the right person for the job, irrespective of anything else.
So you'd have no fears about employing a visually impaired person, even after employing me?
Well, no, because I employed you more than once, if you remember rightly. So
that's true.
No, not at all. It's about capability, isn't it? It's about what is that person capable of doing, and what is the job it requires in terms of capability. So, I think you prove your worth, Steve. It's like, that I think your condition made you probably better at some of the things you do. And I'll give you an example. So when it comes to presenting things, you're always very visual. A lot of other people put loads of words on a PowerPoint presentation, loads of words on a slide, and it was really difficult for the audience to kind of read that and listen to what the people were saying, whereas you always present very few words and it was always visual. And I think that's because that suited your style. That was better for you, and it was actually better for your audience. So it can work in favor. But no, I have no reservations whatsoever. It's about the right person for the right role.
Brilliant. All right. Well, thank you very much for your time, Mr. Veal. I know you're a busy man, so thank you very much for taking this interview. And then hopefully, all the people out there watching this will get some comfort from it, and will find it useful when they broach that moment in their life.
Yeah, hope so, mate. And best of luck to them all.
So, Mike, what did you think of getting an employer's perspective?
I actually was more surprised he called you back, but it was actually really nice seeing, an employer's perspective on dealing with that, because we don't get to see that often. And where'd you get the time machine?
If you found this episode useful, please check out episode 2, where we discussed when should you start using a cane if you have RP.
Wait, telescoping? What, you can like this?
No, yes.
Telescoping by stopping to stop